All right, so welcome to Summer of Drawing. Um, as you could probably tell from the schedule, we're going to be covering quite a bit of information during the course of this summer. So today and also the next class, we're just going to be covering some really basic items, some information that we did cover last summer, but I'm going to present it in a slightly different way. So hopefully it'll get the rust out and we can try some new things. This is my studio. I'm here out on Chappaquiddick Island. This information that you see today, all of these slides will be part of a PDF that I'll send to you after the class. So you can write things down if you want to, or you can just make your own notes knowing that I'll be sending this to you as well. I think it's the last few days perhaps for having the pellet stove on. I think we've got spring coming here. So for those of you who don't know where Chappaquiddick Island is, it's out at the far right end of Martha's Vineyard, and I'm right about where that little pin is. And if you don't know exactly where Martha's Vineyard is, here's the map of Massachusetts, and we're that turquoise island where it says Dukes for Dukes County, and Chappaquiddick Island is part of Edgartown. So I just wanted to share that with you because not everybody is right from this area. So a few more things I wanted to mention. The Vineyard Haven Public Library is co-hosting Summer of Drawing, and thank you so much, and especially to Anne, who is my trusty co-host. They are doing a lot of different events this summer, so do check out their website and see what's going on. As I mentioned before, if you miss a class or if friends want to join later this summer, the classes will go up on YouTube within 24 hours of the class. Let's see. What else? Oh, a PDF containing all the images and information from each class will be emailed to you right after the class ends, so you can keep working by yourself. And I mention this because it's kind of stressful sometimes to try to get done in the few minutes I give you, whatever it is, whatever the task is. So rather than you having to stress out about that, do what you can, knowing that you'll get this PDF and you'll be able to continue without me, there urging you on. Do ask questions in chat. We have quite a number of people attending, so the likelihood of me being able to answer all the questions in class is slim, but I will be sending around a link to the video afterwards, and I'll answer everybody's question in that email, and that way I can think a little bit about my answers if there's something I need to look up. You can always email me anytime with your questions at erwhelan@gmail.com. I'm always happy to hear from you. It might take me a couple of days to get back, depending on what I'm up to, but I really like to be able to help and share information. Okay, and also materials. I mentioned to everybody that pencils are all you need to get started, and I'll start talking about the materials today and mostly in the next class. But the idea is that drawing is drawing. So rather than having you go out and buy a bunch of stuff if you're not quite sure what you want to do, I will provide the materials list of what I'm using, but feel zero pressure to get anything because you'll be able to draw along all summer just with pencils and paper, and then you can decide what you'd like to do beyond that. So drawing supplies you can use for the next few classes include a few pencils, and those can just be regular household pencils that you have around. You can test them out to see if some are a little bit softer and some are a little bit harder, because that might help out a bit. Likewise, a pencil sharpener or a pen knife is useful because sometimes having a better point on your pencil makes all the difference as to how your result comes along. You don't have to sharpen them to like a crazy point, but sharper rather than duller usually helps out. And that's why I usually have a few pencils to pick from. And then a sketchbook or a pile of paper. So I'm a big fan of people keeping sketchbooks. I don't ever ask to see your work, and I feel that people's sketchbooks are sort of private almost. You don't have to share this with anyone. This is your place to mess around and try these things out, see how they go. And if you don't have your sketchbook with you for a class or when you're out drawing or when you get that urge, just go ahead and draw on whatever you have, back of an envelope. Sometimes I'm sitting in line for the Chappie Ferry and all I've got is like a receipt. And so I'm drawing on the back of the receipt, because if something comes out nicely and you like it, you can always tape it into your sketchbook. So don't let the need for special equipment slow you down. I guess that's the message I'm trying to get across. So things that are useful, are like a kneaded rubber eraser or a white eraser. And by that, I mean not the eraser at the end of your pencils, because those tend to be dried out and make red marks over your lovely drawing and things like that. So a kneaded rubber eraser is useful also because you can shape it into various different points or edges for some fancy erasing. And we'll talk about these supplies more and more as the summer goes on. If you do have a charcoal pencil or can get a charcoal pencil or use a pencil that is very soft, when we get in I think it's 2 weeks time to the charcoal part of the classes, just being able to smudge your pencil or smudge the charcoal a bit will help you with that part. There are some quite inexpensive charcoal pencil sets that you can get if you feel like picking something up. And like I said, I'll have some links and things for you. And I will say also that when I send out the list of what I'll be using, there will be some drawing materials that come in pencil form and some drawing materials that are just, I don't know if I've got one here, but just sort of, they're like a block of charcoal or Conte. If you've never used these things before, pick the pencil option, because the other stuff, like vine charcoal and blocks of color and stuff, they look really great, but they're hard to use to start with until you get used to it. So you can see what I do with them, but pick the pencil option, the pencil Conte crayon, the pencil charcoal. It's just that much easier to hold, charcoal that's in a pencil format than a piece of vine charcoal. And lastly, it will also be useful for the pen and ink part. If you're not quite sure what to do about pen and ink, there are a lot of options. A fine black marker or a gel ink pen would work just great. So I like using these Pilot fine point or medium point pens. They're just the regular ballpoint type of pen. The gel pens are useful. Just the sort of thing the Pilot or Parker sort of thing you can get in a drugstore is fine. But that way you'll be able to do the pen and ink work without necessarily having to invest in a bunch of supplies there either. So that's just to get started. Let's see, excuse me. So where are we going exactly? So I decided, well, I like analogies, right? So this is like we're going to the center of the country. Now, the center of the country is now in this place called, I think it's pronounced Belle Fourche, which is in South Dakota. It used to be further over in Kansas, but since Alaska and Hawaii became part of the states, they had to move the center of the country over a little bit. So I look at this entire drawing summer as being, we are going from wherever we are to Belle Fourche. We are taking this trip and we have a couple of options. I can either provide you with a map, I can be there to guide you and help you and show you sort of the paths to take, and we can take the highways and the roads. Or you can try to get there yourself by sort of with a machete and no map and no compass, just sort of getting out there and hacking around. And you may end up in Belle Fourche or you may not. And so my goal is, within these 20 classes, is to guide you quite a bit, perhaps more than you are used to or would like necessarily for some of these topics. So I'm going to ask you to just relax and let me guide you. Let me take you along on these steps, try the exercises, and see how they are going to kind of build on each other, see how they work for you. And then at the end of the summer, if you decide, hey, I liked some of what she showed me, but not others, that is perfectly fine. That's what I want you to do. This isn't just my way of getting to Belle Fourche, but for the first time, I'd like to show you how we're going to go and give you some step by step. So I've got this saying I use all the time, which is observation and practice are the key to mastery. Because technique, now a lot of people, I do it too. I've got lots of books on drawing, beautiful books that seduced me into wanting to buy them because they showed me these really fabulous techniques. And how many of them do I sit down and really copy or try? Not that many, actually. Because when it comes down to it, I'm going to want to draw like me, and I want you to draw like you. So even though I'm going to lead you through exercises, however you draw today, tomorrow, next week, next month, that's just all part of your drawing experience. And I find that what it really matters is learning to see things in a different way rather than worrying so much about, is my pencil technique exactly right? Am I doing this perfectly? And I think for women in particular, we have really high standards for ourselves. And we beat each other up a lot about whatever we're doing and why isn't it perfect? And what is everyone else doing? And am I as good as them? Which is why I don't like people to show their art on the Zoom class. You could be sitting there doing a little stick figure with a tail, and I won't know it. And that's the way I think these classes need to be. So practicing will get you that technique. Practicing will get you towards that level of finish that you're looking for. But what I want you to do first is concentrate on the observation part. And that's what we'll be talking about a lot today. So interesting drawings depend, I think, mostly on observation. You probably have seen beautifully rendered work that really might not have been that interesting. And then you might have been caught by somebody's sketch that was sort of offhand, but something about how they looked at the scene really caught your eye. And that's how we're going to be looking at things to start off with. So pencils and paper, results will vary. So this is kind of like the caveat that they give you, on the medical advertising when you're not quite sure what's going to happen. And that is because different types of paper and different types of pencils are going to have different results. So each one of you sitting at home, you probably have a different type of paper and a different pencil than each other. And I don't want you to worry about that at all. I do want you to try out different combinations of whatever you have on hand to see what happens. What happens when you draw on a brown paper bag? What happens when you draw on the really expensive drawing paper or you know, find which combinations you like, and you might find there are different combinations for different circumstances. But the one thing I will ask you to do, and I don't sort of tell you to do things all that often, but this is what I am telling you to do, and that is try to get used to holding the pencil as far back away from the tip, away from the pointy part as you possibly can, and try to start. Now, to begin with, you might only be able to move about an inch back. That might feel like too far. Eventually, you'll be able to get back closer to the end of the pencil and be able to make much freer marks, and you'll also have a lot more control over the tip. Now that doesn't sound possible, because usually when people want control, they get as far up close to the lead as they possibly can. But in actual fact, when you're doing a drawing and you want to vary the tones, and you want to be able to draw straight lines and things like that, being able to use your whole arm or even just your whole hand or even your arm from the elbow, those things will make a big difference. So that's something to start practicing, but it will make a lot of difference in the long term. And then the way that you get lighter and darker values when you're holding your pencil like that is either by exerting a little more pressure, or you can use a different pencil that might be softer or harder, or you can just make multiple passes. In other words, you can just go over it over and over again in different ways until you get the level of darkness or lightness that you're looking for. So pencil drawing is really simple. You can make it as complicated as you want to for yourself, but these things are the basics. Don't hold that pencil too close up to the front, or you will find it very, very difficult to get a light touch, and everything will come out really dark. The further back you hold it, the easier it'll be to have a light touch, and you'll just find this entire process a lot easier to do. Okay. So first exercise. This is a value scale, and you may have seen these before, but I wanted to familiarize you with the term value. And value just means light to dark. And these value scales are used quite a bit in classes to show the range of color or the range of darkness or whatever that you can try to exact from your tools. So for today, we don't need to go through and try to draw every single one of these values, although that can be a useful exercise just to learn control. What I would like you to do in your sketchbook right now, and I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do it, is to draw 3 squares or rectangles, and one of them you get off easy. You don't have to color in at all. That's white. The next one I would go for is the darkest one. Go ahead and make a pretty dark, fill that square in pretty dark. And then try to find something about in the middle. try to do what's called a mid-tone square. And this is just to get you warmed up and get you used to perhaps holding that pencil a little bit further back. Okay, so while you're finishing up this, someone asked in chat, will I be providing the notes? Absolutely. Hopefully you'll probably want to write some things down because I don't think that there'll be a transcript necessarily, but you can either watch on video or you'll be able to get the PDF, which will have a lot of information in that. So go ahead and finish this up and we'll keep moving. As I said before, if on any exercise you don't get to finish a particular stage, you'll always be able to work more on your own time. So let's move on. Whoops. There we go. So composition. We're moving quickly from value to composition because we'll be going back to value again in a few minutes. But I want to just talk about composition in general. These are the two things we'll concentrate on today, value and composition. Because as I said, the technique and the details, those will come over time. So composition is the arrangement of subject matter in your artwork. And you can think of it as design or the layout of your drawing. Things that people talk about when it comes to the composition are, the contrast, what you're emphasizing, is there movement through the drawing, the pattern and rhythm, is there unity, that sort of thing. We're not going to get deep into all of that subject matter right at this moment. We'll address these things as they come up over the course of the summer. But I wanted to point out this little sketch by Edgar Degas, which actually displays a lot of those things. There's contrast, there's emphasis, there's sort of a rhythm to the sketch, but it's also pretty rough. It's not. He's taken a little bit of care with it, but he hasn't gone crazy with it. Still, because there's this nice contrast, the whole thing does have some unity. He has a little bit of a sense of distance and some stuff in the foreground. So he decided this was an interesting composition and decided to sketch it. And I wanted to emphasize that part, that what he thought he liked, because composition, there are all kinds of rules you can follow. And there are things you might have heard of, like the Fibonacci sequence or the golden mean or the rule of thirds or the rule of fifths or whatever. There are lots of those things, and they're all very interesting to know about. But what I feel is that we have an innate sense of design, every single one of us. We use design every single day. When we set the table, when we park the car, when we organize the paperwork on our desks, when we organize or don't organize things in our closets, that's our own innate personal sense of design. So we actually, I want to try to separate the idea of what we think about for art and what we think about for the rest of our lives. They really are closely joined. And when you walk along or when you go through your house and you see something that strikes your eye for some reason, it's because you have that innate sense of design and it's clicking in and it's telling you that there's something there, something about the light pattern or something about the color or something that, who knows what it is, but something that's personal to you. And that's what I want to concentrate on rather than worrying about a lot of formulas. So composition can be it can be abstract or realistic. I tend to start off with realistic instruction for people because I think it helps to have a little bit of an understanding how to draw what we see around us. But here's a Robert Motherwell lithograph, which has a design feeling in and of itself. It has a composition, and it's interesting and pleasing, and it has rhythm and unity and contrast. So this is what I mean by composition and design is very personal. And also your drawing style is very personal. There are some of you who might have not cared for the Degas and like the Robert Motherwell, and there might be some of you who feel exactly the opposite. So, so this is what I mean. Your personal expression and playing around in your sketchbooks are really important. So you can plan out your composition in terms of what you're going to draw. For example, a still life, you can set it up in a pleasing manner, or you can just be walking around and see something and decide you're going to draw it. Or you can see something that you'd like to draw, but decide to edit it and move things around in the scene. And we'll be talking a lot about how to do that during the course of the summer, to make sense of what you want. But that's really all there is to composition. So here's a really lovely drawing by Charles White, where he took a real life scene, but he embellished it to get a better composition and a better design and to get some emotion across to it. So there's a lot that can be done with drawing. Starting from realism is useful. It gives you sort of an anchor point, but thinking then beyond it about what you'd like to do with your drawing or what you're trying to express, that takes a little while. You have to have usually a little bit of technical ability under your belt to really be able to start to express yourself. But I thought this was a really great example of that combination between, what he felt he wanted to show emotionally and also some realistic drawing. So first step will be using a viewfinder. Now, this is something that I don't always go into with people, but I have come to find it really, really useful. And so a viewfinder is just something that you can look through to get an idea of what a composition would look like. And I found this photo on the internet, which I thought said it all. When you are faced with something that's relatively complex, like this particular plant, it's hard to know how much of the scene are you going to include? Where's it going to go on your page? And we have a tendency to sit down and start drawing wildly, only to find out we haven't left ourselves enough room on the page, or it just kind of, even when we put a lot of effort into it, it sort of looks blah. So by going for the composition, going for a good, interesting composition up front, and using the viewfinder to help us get there, is a great way to shortcut yourself to success. And I find in artwork in general, drawing or painting, that as much as I can do to set myself up for success, I try to, because there will always be a lot of things that go wrong, lots and lots of things that go wrong along the way to getting to a really nice finished piece. And so why make it difficult on yourself when you start off? Why not use something like a viewfinder? So you can make one from paper or cardboard. I use some of these same 3x5 cards I have, and I just cut rectangles out. And all therefore is when I'm looking around my studio, I go, wow, how would I ever possibly draw this? But if I'm looking through the viewfinder, I go, oh, that stove over there with the brushes on, that would be an interesting composition. And I can forget about the rest of what I'm looking at. So viewfinders come in a lot of different forms. You can either buy a fancy one that slides in and out and lets you do squares and rectangles. You can make one out of a couple of pieces of mat board or, the cardboard from the Amazon box. You could just make it with a piece of paper and cut a hole. But you can see in both the left and the right examples how it really does help you narrow down what it is that you're trying to draw. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of viewfinder you have. I recommend having a few, which is why I use 3x5 cards, because I've got them all over the place. Because you want it to be something you're actually going to use. What happens a lot is you make a viewfinder and you go, great, I've got a viewfinder, and then you never use it. So that's not helpful. Just knowing what they're for isn't helpful. You want to actually use them to make your life easier and to get yourself started on a drawing. Now, you probably have seen pictures of people doing, there we go, doing it with their hands, making a viewfinder with their hands. And that can be useful to sort of zero in on that part of a scene that you're looking for. But the reason I don't recommend it for drawing is it's very hard to do that and draw. You're constantly having to find that scene again. Whereas at least with a little Weave viewfinder that's made out of a card, you can hold it up and get just the basic lines down. Like, you're not going to necessarily use this the whole time, although you can refer back to it. But it just sort of tells you, where's the top of my scene? Where's the where's the center of the scene? What's going on? Just enough so you can get some basic lines down. So I'm a big fan of viewfinders. So the very best composition trick, anyone who's ever taken a class with me or done anything to do with drawing or painting knows that I love the idea of notan. And so notan is a concept that was used a lot in Japanese art. And I think people in the States started talking about it in the 1930s when much more Asian art was starting to become popular in the West. So um, the the Japanese concept was a pleasing combination of lights and darks, a design or pattern of a work of art, and that could be anything from how a lattice screen was cut to actually artwork or to a printed garment. And we have taken it sort of since then, and we apply it to the idea of artwork. Um, and I find that once you've zeroed in on that scene that you want to actually draw, the next best thing to do is to make a little image it for yourself, a little notan that's going to give you some idea of where you're heading next. Because just like that business of trying to get ourselves over to South Dakota, just identifying a scene and then diving in is things are going to go wrong. You're not quite sure what should be dark, what should be light. You'll start drawing something too dark, and then it'll be hard to back up. So I find trying to figure out what is interesting about this scene and using contrast as my very first building block is a way to go. Now, I will say there are lots of times you'll be looking at a scene that is very gray. The whole thing is very gray or very light, and it will be difficult to pick out the contrast. And this will be something else I will talk about during the course of the summer, is how to deal with that more difficult subject matter. But for the moment, we're going to take it easy on ourselves, and we're going to pick scenes that have good contrast in them. Because why not, right? If there's a difficult scene and an easier scene, let's just go for the easier scene for the moment. So these are just a few examples where I saw these photographs and then I went ahead and did these notan. Now I want to point out the one on the lower right. After I did that one, I looked at it and I said, you know what? I went too far. I made too many things dark. I really should have left all of that foliage either out or made it a mid-tone. And so we'll be talking this morning a little bit about midtones and how they work as well, because sometimes you can overdo it with the whole notan thing. So the key to being able to do a notan and be able to get this concept of design is to be able to squint. So I would like all of you right now to squint at these these photographs until you really can't see the subject, and all you can see are light and dark areas. So I picked photos which actually already have pretty good design to them. But you can see when you do this, how all of that stuff that you're not quite sure about, whether it should go in or not, for example, all of those poles over on the left-hand side, they kind of disappear. And the basic design of that photo on the left-hand side is a really good one. That's a really strong composition. And then when you go ahead to actually do a drawing like that, you could then decide how much or should any of all of those poles and ribbons be included. Now, the one on the right is a little bit more difficult because we can see some really strong darks, but then there's that stuff that's kind of a mid-tone. And we have to decide for ourselves, do we include that in the darks, or should we leave it as a light? Or should we just make it a mid-tone? So those are the kinds of individual decisions that you'll make as you go along that'll help make your art distinctive from anyone else's, because no two people will interpret these exactly the same. Now, this is a really complex photo, and this is a good example of sometimes you see a scene that looks interesting, but where do you even start? So go ahead and squint on this one too. Try to get your eyes almost to the point of being closed until you can really only just see dark and light. And that gives you an idea of some really strong shapes that you could use for a notan to anchor your drawing. So the reason that you go through all of these steps, and the reason you're looking for the notan, is because you want to maintain this kind of interesting level of contrast and design all the way through your drawing or painting. While you're drawing, what will happen is everything will dissolve into mid-tones at some point. You'll be drawing away, and suddenly everything is in those middle values, the 30% to the 60%. And you'll have lost that feeling, the thing that interested you. And that's when you look back at your notan and you go, okay, wait a minute, where was that design? And you go, oh, I should darken up some of these areas that I let go into midtones and get that zing back to my artwork. So learning from the masters is something else we'll do a lot this summer. When I say that, so I used to think learning from the masters meant, you're in Victorian garb and you're standing with an easel in a museum and you're copying paintings. And I thought to myself, well, that's not very realistic, is it? I didn't really understand at that point that what it meant was that masters have already learned these things we're learning. And why don't we go and have a look and see how they applied them and get some ideas from that? So I think looking at artwork that's especially great art and trying to say to yourself, hey, did they use that concept? How is contrast useful in their artwork? So here's one from Vincent van Gogh, and you can definitely see how that strength is being used there. Here's a really good one from Edward Hopper, big time design, light and dark, no problem there, seeing how that notan concept applies. And also modern art, it doesn't just have to be the masters from the past. If you squint at this one, this has got really strong design. And that really, even just with a few colors, really captures a person's eye. I use these examples in color just because we're used to seeing in color around us. And so it makes it a little bit easier to see. So what I'd like you to do right now, we're just going to work through a few exercises, is to go ahead and just practice making notans yourself. So I did a very quick one here to the right, and using that photo that we just looked at, I went ahead and squinted, and then I drew just a rectangle, sketched the basic lines for placement, and then I drew in the dark value as one big mass. And so while you're working on it, I'm going to talk a little bit about this whole idea of mass and a little bit about how our brains process information. So when we're looking at this photo, if we're not squinting, our brains are taking in a whole bunch of information. They're like, oh, there's a guy in an anorak, and the other person seems to have something wrapped around them, and the guy's got something over his shoulder, and those are stones, and there are bricks on the ground, and there are probably 20 of those posts, and all of this information is flooding in. So it's really difficult to shut that off and tell your brain just to sit back for a bit. And so I find that doing the notan gives my brain something else to think about. And so while I'm sitting there, something about the scene captured me, and I thought, oh, that's cool. Let me do a really quick sketch of that. But I need to be able to eliminate a lot of information. And that means I need to turn off that little business in my brain that's going on and telling me all of the stuff that should be included. I don't know about you, but I've had the problem many times when I have encountered a scene that looks interesting and I start to draw without taking the time to sit and look and think about it. And the next thing I know, I'm completely in the weeds. There's too much information. I don't have any direction. I don't know where I'm going with the whole thing. So the notan makes me go, okay, let's get the design sorted out before we go any further. Let me take some time and look at this scene and eliminate things. So let's go on and do another one. So here's that more problematic one, right? So same type of thing, draw a rectangle, sketch in the basic lines, and then put in the dark values where you think they are the dark. Now, I'll tell you that when I did this really quick sketch this morning. You can see it's very, very basic, but it's just for the design of the piece. I went ahead the first time and I had put the dark going in all the way up to where the guy's legs start. Because I was like, oh, okay, I could make all of that a dark down there. That would be kind of interesting. But when I did that, it was too much. So I made another sketch that didn't have that in. So that was really useful because it told me something about if I were to go ahead and make an entire drawing out of this, I would want to make sure I was modulating that area under his legs and not letting it become too dark. So it helped me to get that balance that I wanted to work towards right from the start. And I also noticed a couple of things. Like I noticed the fact, for example, of those two lower rectangles that are just under the top railing, which I hadn't really seen. I knew they were there, but I hadn't really seen them until I actually had to include them in the notan. So this is what this entire notan process is useful for. So just go ahead and finish that one up and we'll move on to another. And I'm kind of shoving you through these, but we've got a few things to do. All right, moving on to the next one. So here's one I'll give you a little more time for this one because this is more complicated. So, what do you do when you do have a scene where the values seem pretty close to each other? And this is definitely one of those where you've got to decide if you're going to do a notan, where the lights and the darks are, and maybe you have to manipulate the scene a little bit to make it a bit more interesting. So when I squinted at this to begin with, I had decided I was going to make the trees and the buildings, well, all the trees, the dark. Everything on the road was going to be the mid-tone, and everything at the top was going to be the light. When I did that, I was like, I'm not too sure about that. And of course, you can try that yourself and sort of see how it goes. I mean, definitely feel free to change it. You don't have to do what I did. But as it was, I ended up trying a couple of different options. And the one I ended up with on um, was where I decided to make some of the background also a mid-tone to sort of shove it back a little bit further. And I also decided to darken up something in the foreground that isn't actually dark in the photograph, just to give myself a little bit more of something going on. So Noten is a perfect place to start playing around with all kinds of design ideas. And once again, trying to set yourself up for success. These little sketches I keep them tiny. I usually no bigger than 2 by 3 and usually a lot smaller than that. Um, and often I will take from this, I will then often do a little tiny thumbnail also with a few values and things and a little bit more of the drawing. And we'll do some of that probably next week, just to take it a little bit further and start to make more decisions. But this stops me from getting in there and starting to draw buildings without really even thinking about what should be going on. If you hear meowing in the background, my cat's decided it's playtime and she wants my attention. But we're gonna have to keep her over there to the side for the moment. All right, while you're sketching on this, I want to just talk for a minute about our expectations about drawing and art. And let's see, where shall I start with that? I guess a good place to start is there's this concept that we hear a lot about that people say, well, art happens. In other words, we should just be able to sketch and draw innately, based on our own artistic talent or whatever. And everything that we do should be able to just sort of come out looking good. Either that, or even if it doesn't look good, it's art because it happened, because we did this thing. And it's an interesting take, and I know we can probably debate this entire concept in a number of different ways. But what I'd like you to do to think about this summer is that art does happen, but it happens while we're practicing, and it happens while we're thinking and observing, and while we're doing notans, and while we're doing rough sketches. Sometimes a notan you do, or a little sketch, or something that you just did in 10 minutes really does have some innate sense of design and beauty to it. But we're not trying to make notans that have beauty to them. We're trying to use them as a tool to understand and observe what we're looking at. Likewise, when it gets to drawing objects and such, I will be interested in you looking at new ways, the object in new ways, and trying different techniques and trying different ideas on how to make a composition look good. And some of those will work out beautifully, and a lot of them won't. And I just want to prepare you for that, because the the art happens part doesn't mean that every single splatter of paint that we splatter around is a beautiful thing. But sometimes a painting that is made of splatters of paint is a beautiful thing. And you have to go through this sort of iterative process to get yourself there. And sometimes you'll do a drawing and your first reaction will be, oh, this is awful, and I want to rip it up. And that's easy to do with drawings because they are paper and pencil, and you feel perhaps they're a bit more disposable than a canvas, which is a little harder to get rid of. But I'm going to encourage you to do a couple of things. And one is, don't get rid of your art until a few days later, at least. Often when you come back to it in the morning or the couple of days, you go, hey, this was not so bad after all. There's something I learned here. It should stay in the sketchbook. And likewise, don't worry about trying to make everything perfect. Everything doesn't have to be, in your mind, a work of art, but a work of art might actually happen because you're not worrying about it so much. So I hope that makes sense. And we'll sort of be continuing to talk about some of these themes as we go on. Okay, we're going to move on from this one for the moment before you guys start getting too involved. All right, so I have included, as a little bit of a break, some poetry. And this is one of my favorite poems, and I'm sure it's a favorite poem for a lot of people, by Mary Oliver, called The Summer Day. And I'm including this because we're at the beginning of the summer, and it's been a very crazy year, to say the least. That's probably the understatement. And we're at the beginning of the start of this summer where all kinds of interesting things could happen. And one of the things that I'm hoping for, I highlighted those last two lines. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And isn't that a really good theme for the summer? So when you're going about your day and you're thinking to yourself, well, I want to learn how to draw and I want to be better at drawing, and it's something I've always wanted to do. But you know what? There's a really good show on TV, or, there's someone I need to call. I should go check out these internet sites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want you to think about this poem and go, you made the commitment to yourself that you wanted to draw and to learn some new things. And this summer, this is that thing that you can do with your one wild and precious summer, is to carry that sketchbook around with you and look for opportunities to draw anything, whether it's the exercises that I give you or suggest, or just something that you want to do that has nothing to do with the classes. But it would be wonderful, I think, for all of us at the end of the summer to have practiced enough that we really felt we had made a bit of progress. And so that's why I'm including a little poetry in our day. I just love her poetry anyway. And now let's move on to the last segment. I just want to talk about, this is sort of a project for you to work on at home. This is my backyard. And out there is Bill's boat shop. We actually ended up buying the house and this 2-car garage, not to put any cars in. As you can see, all the cars are outside. But Bill builds small wooden boats in there. So he's got that crazy looking thing out there as a steam box where he steams the planks, and then he uses it when they're wet and very pliable. He bends them around the edge of the boat. So I was looking out there one evening and I go, there are some possibilities in that scene. I'm going to go ahead and snap a photo and see what I can do with it. But when I look at it, now I go, gosh, there's too much information there. So I want to digress a little bit and talk about house cleaning. So you're probably wondering how I'm going from this scene to house cleaning. But I have this concept I've always used called 50%ing. It's a philosophy I have in general when it comes to cleaning things out. And usually if you're faced, for example, with a cluttered closet and you go, I've got to clean this out. Well, that's a little daunting because you've got to make a decision about everything that's in there. So instead, what I do is I go, I'm just going to make this 50% cleaner. I'm just going to clean out 50% of the clutter, and I can make all the rest of the decisions later. And usually I find out by the time I've thrown out the stuff that wasn't supposed to be there, is old, dirty, needs fixing, blah, blah, blah. Hey, the closet is a lot cleaner because I did this 50%ing. It just makes things less daunting. So I use that same concept when it comes to artwork. I look at a scene like this and I say to myself, 50% of that information cannot go in this sketch. Whether it's there are too many tree limbs, whether there's too many vehicles, whatever it happens to be. I just decide that 50% of what I see is how I'm going to get down to simplifying. So I can get rid of that detail by squinting, because that eliminates all those trees in the background. All of a sudden, all I've got now is about a 60% value shape of trees going on. And another thing I can do then is use the viewfinder. So I've got 3 different examples to show you right here. And what I would like you to do over the course of the next week, when you have a few minutes, is pick one of these examples, do a little notan and maybe even a little sketch. You can use, 2 values, 3 values, whatever you'd like to do. Um, Try to eliminate 50% of what you see. Try to figure out what you think is interesting and what isn't. You can also just work from the big photograph yourself and do something completely different. You don't have to follow my suggestions. But in showing you this, I want you to see how, by changing how the viewfinder looks at the scene, you can get a very different layout and a very different design and a different emphasis as well. So I was looking at this. Let me just flip back to this one, to the beginning. Like, to me, when I look at this records to me, my more don't my backyard, like, what I think of it. There's Bill's truck, there's my boat, there's his boat shop. When I move to this next one, well, now it's all about that light coming out of the boat shop, and also that beautiful tree and how that tree works. And then I decided, oh, I needed to have that other tree in as well, just for a bit of balance. But I could decide when I was drawing it to take that second tree out, just to not draw that in there. And here's another option as well. Perhaps while I'm looking at that and using a viewfinder, I might decide to do something completely different and take all of those trees and other buildings out and just have it about the building and how the lacework of the trees hits the sky. So taking this kind of view of squinting, trying to eliminate as much information as you can, using the viewfinder to get the rest of the clutter of the scene out of the way, is a good way to start zeroing in on getting a good design. And a good design is the foundation to having a good drawing. So just to go back over that for a minute, look around yourself, around your home and outside as you're walking along. Look for potential interesting layouts or compositions. And I find those mostly by zeroing in on places where I see high contrast. A really great way to do this is look out a window, because when you're looking out a window, you're already, there's the viewfinder, right? And you probably see some light and dark out there, which is a notan in itself. So that's really useful. If you have a very large window, you probably want to use a viewfinder because you'll see too much stuff. But if it's a small window, it sort of frames it for you. Make some notan sketches in 2 or 3 values. Only put in 50% of what you see, and practice holding that pencil further back for better control. And either use more pressure or multiple passes to help you vary your values. So this is a very basic start, a basic start to the summer of drawing. But by having this exercise firmly planted in your head, it will really, really help with everything else we do, whether we're drawing people, scenery, folds, animals, using the different types of drawing media. It doesn't matter. The strong design will hold everything together. So next week, what we're going to do is we'll be talking about perspective and then moving the sketch along to the next stage.